Good evening. We'll get started in 2 minutes. We'll get started in 2 minutes. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Masonic Seminar Series. My name is Brother Katie Kunsier, and I am the host and moderator for this group, which is hosted and supported by Universal Co-Masonry. I'd like to invite everyone to turn on their cameras if they are able to, if your network will support it, so that we can see your wonderfully beautiful and handsome faces. The purpose of the Masonic Seminar Series is to provide an informational platform for people to access knowledge and facts about Freemasonry, as well as get a myriad of different opinions about Freemasonry. So that is why we created this group back in, I think it's 2017, 2018. And I'm happy to say that it has grown quite substantially over the last several years because so many people feel a draw towards Freemasonry, a genuine pull, but they're not quite sure what it is that they're being pulled towards. So we have found that through this group that many people feel a lot more informed about what Freemasonry is and what it is not. And so hopefully you'll have that opportunity again tonight if you're returning with us, as well as if this is your first time. I have here in the office with me, I have Brother Patrick Alessandra, and I have Brother Benjamin Hartle, who are also working with me to support technology. We're streaming on multiple platforms as well as working through Zoom. Based off of some things that happened in the last session, we have made some updates. If you notice, you had to register, which helps us just know who's coming in, as well as we have changed it that you have to ask permission to unmute yourself. That way we don't have any obscene music or any comments that get in the way. So at any point tonight during our discussion, if you want to speak, use your virtual hand option, and then Brother Benjamin will unmute you if you're coming in through our Zoom platform, or he'll ask you to be unmuted. So just be aware there's just an extra step so that we can preserve the space that we are creating each time that we do a Masonic seminar. The topics we talk about are not necessarily the most common topics and oftentimes very personal topics, because we're talking about the most important questions of humanity is, what am I, where did I come from, and where am I going? So hopefully you won't mind the extra steps, but that is what we've done this evening. So before we jump into our topics, because there are 2 tonight that we will address, just remember, please make sure to use the virtual hand option. Keep your camera on. If we can see your face, that would be lovely. And if you have any questions throughout the discussion tonight, please ask. If you even have comments that you'd like to share, it helps, just makes a more robust interaction, because many people here, if not all of us here, are looking for a community that has not necessarily the same type of thinking, but necessarily we're looking at like-minded individuals. And so having that added interaction really, really makes it a more enriching experience. I think that's all of the do's and don'ts for the Masonic seminar. I do apologize if I start looking off camera, because my My screen is a little bit off to the right, so when I'm looking at my presentation, make sure that I'm tracking appropriately. That's why I'm looking here. Lastly, if you have questions or comments, please make sure that you keep them on topic. You can put them in the chat function if you're joining us from Zoom. We'll have Brother Benjamin be responding to those, and comments will be addressed by Brother Patrick. All right, so each month, the Masonic Seminar Series here, we talk about a different topic. When we look at Freemasonry, it's an anthological movement, meaning that we don't base our previous seminars off of past months, just because we have so many people coming in and so many people, it's very fluid. So as I do each month, I sit down and I really try to intuit what would be the best discussion for us this evening. And tonight I've selected two topics. The first one is, what is Freemasonry? And the second one is, what are the three grand principles of which Freemasonry is founded upon? And the reason why I chose these two topics is when I first started doing the seminar, I would do what is Freemasonry every January, because that was a really great way to get us started about the different obediences and how are we different from this order or that order. And then I moved it off the docket, as we often change our themes, so that way it's always something new and something to be learned. But we haven't seen this in a while. And myself and Brother Rosario, who's here this evening, we work with the inquirers amongst other brothers here at the general office. And a lot of questions we get is, well, what's the difference between universal co-masonry and everything else? Is it masonry or is it not masonry, and all that? So tonight, that's one of the things that we're going to focus on. And the second half of our time will be spent talking about the three grand principles on which the order and all of Freemasonry is founded upon. So let me share my screen with you. So when we look at Freemasonry, Freemasonry is a very large, extensive, complex, intricate ideology and philosophy of life. It is often, as I say, it is an application rather than just a theoretical interaction. Freemasonry is a lifestyle versus just a hobby. Now, there are many who make it a hobby, but if you're truly to gain the benefits of what Freemasonry offers, that would be to inculcate all of the virtues and principles it's trying to teach you into the very fabric of who you are in all of your interactions. So what is Freemasonry? It's syncretic. And what I mean by syncretic is that it is a conglomeration of many influences throughout the different millennia and decades and centuries that it's been around. There are different incarnations, as I like to say, in Freemasonry. We often see that it's from time immemorial, but it moves through various influences. And what we look at today is a history that is rich with the mystery traditions. So you'll see influences from the Egyptians, from the Pythagorean schools, from Rome, from Greece, from all around. And you'll see influences that will come through Freemasonry. Now, Freemasonry isn't Egyptian and it isn't Greek, it is Masonic. It is its own entity, very much like a child is not a replica of either parent, but is a infusion and a mix of their parents and a little bit of their own traits and personalities. And that's what we see with Freemasonry. This middle picture that you see in the middle of your screen is an artwork that is called Freemasonry Teaching the People, and it has a ton of symbolism in it. So if you ever have some time, you can Google it. You can also email me. I can tell you where to find the photo. And you can just look at the symbolism. There's so much in there, and I would highly recommend it. So we're going to look at the definition and purpose of Freemasonry in this first half. We're going to look at the differences on a very general level between the Masonic orders across the board, and then just what are the specific requirements if you're looking to possibly join Universal Co-Masonry, which is the obedience that is represented here tonight. So we often see the definition of Freemasonry to be very abstract in and of itself. Oftentimes when we come into a definition, we hope that definition is going to elucidate us more on the subject matter. And oftentimes we find definitions can be quite confusing, because what is a peculiar system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbol? That is what Freemasonry is. It is actually the best definition I have found of very succinct and to the point on what Freemasonry is trying to do. Just some context about the definition. If you look at the word peculiar in the context of what the word meant back when this was given as a first came into being as a definition, it means extraordinary. It means beyond the ordinary, not strange. And when we look at morality, Freemasonry has everything to do with morality. And there is a saying out there by other obediences that says, making good men better. But I would argue there are many moral philosophies out there that can make any person better. But why is Freemasonry unique and extraordinary in this way? So we'll talk a little bit about that throughout. We won't spend a lot of points on it, but it is something to keep in mind that that's where the application comes in, is that you can't just take your understanding of morality and not apply it. You can't just talk about it. You have to live it. And Freemasonry is trying to empower you with the tools, both spiritually, physically, mentally, but also with the wherewithal of how to do that. Veiled in allegory, Freemasonry is one grand drama and narrative. It is one massive story from start to end. And some particular Masonic obediences recognize this and really try to put it forward in their practices, and some not so much. So there's going to be some variation on that. But an allegory is when you're trying to impart a certain usually it's moral import through a story. Now, in Masonry, we do have a story, but remember, it's not surface level. The point is it's the story behind the story. So most of our time in Freemasonry is trying to unwrap what that story is and really try to understand what's the story behind that story. And then from there, pull out the truths that the universe is trying to get us to comprehend in the context of whatever it is that we're learning. And this is done by symbol. One of the things that I think is most important, and this will get into the first breakaway of like the different obediences, as they're called in Masonry, is that symbol doesn't allow you to concretize a particular viewpoint. So when you have a story that is just illustration, that allows each individual to interact, I wouldn't say interpret, but to interact with that story from where they're at in their life and where they're at in their perspective. Now, that doesn't mean that the symbols don't have a truth that's objective. It just means that it's letting you be the active player in the game, where many Masonic obediences will probably make it a little bit more concretizing, and it has to be this, or it means that, and you have to see it this way. And the difference of those two types of thinking is dogmatic Masonry and adogmatic Masonry. Again, dogmatic means you have to believe a certain way. Oftentimes you have to either tends to be Christian, but you could be Jewish. You have to have a certain religion, and you have to interpret it through that lens. Adogmatic doesn't mean that there is no dogma. It just says that there is a variety of religions that can interact in with that symbol and really try to pull out the truths that are hidden in the fabric. And universal Co-Masonry falls in that latter category. We are adogmatic Masonry. In fact, I sit in many lodge meetings with multiple belief systems, spiritual, religious, of all different types. With that being said, that doesn't mean that you can have any ideology and still sit in lodge, because you will see us struggle with I would say the modern atheist, and that's someone who's very hardcore. There is no God, there is no afterlife type of perspective, and a nihilist. Those two philosophies, and a hedonist, those three philosophies tend to be a struggle, because Freemasonry is the antithesis of that. When we look at atheism, you have a belief in a supreme creative force in universal Co-Masonry. So that is something you should, if you're wanting to join, you have to have. The details is not important to us in the sense of membership, whether or not that defines if you can get in, but it is important that you believe in that. A nihilist is an individual who believes that there's no purpose to anything, that there's nothing beyond, and Freemasonry definitely believes in permanence of the soul, and that there's a continuation of things. So if you're a nihilist, your philosophies aren't necessarily going to grok one with the other. And then the last one, hedonism, which, if you had the chance to see us last month, we talked about different philosophies of morals and ethics. And hedonism is very much about pleasuring the base material, the physical form, and Freemasonry is about subduing the material form and elevating the spirit within. So it is in direct conflict with that. So those are the three philosophies that if you're like, yes, I'm a hedonist, or yes, I'm a nihilist, you will find a great struggle in many of the Masonic organizations. not all of them, but many. But definitely here at Universal Co-Masonry, that would be a struggle for you. Freemasonry is a fraternity including men and women of every race, nationality, and religion, wishing to do away with all cause for division and strife. It continually seeks the means which to help all human beings to unite and work together for the perfection or the perfecting of humanity. This particular excerpt comes straight from our website. This is one thing about Universal Co-Masonry, is that we are open to all peoples. We do not discriminate based off of gender, race, religion, orientation. Like, that's not to us. We believe the soul is above that. So we're looking at things that are more criteria of the soul, which I will talk about here in a minute. So the purpose of Freemasonry is to unite us all and to help us get to where we're going. And there may be, you can ask any Mason, they might have an answer, they might not, depending on who you're asking. What is the destiny of humanity? And whether or not they have the answer for it it's not irrelevant, but I don't think it's pertinent to our actions, because we all think that there's a destiny for humanity, and it is a great one. And we're coming together with all of our strengths and our weaknesses to help bring together that destiny, to make it manifested, bring it from the unreal into the real, as we say in Masonry. So that is the purpose. So we get a lot of individuals who, I have this type of lifestyle or that type of belief. We do not discriminate. And we also are not a platform for any political or social agenda either. You do not see here at Universal Co-Masonry that will take a stance on one thing or another, because again, we're trying to unite and not necessarily divide. And so it's up to each member to determine what they think is the right course for humanity, which is why oftentimes you will find that you'll have Masons on both sides of an argument. Especially my favorite one is was it the Revolutionary War? Yeah, I have my history checker here because I'm terrible at dates. So it was both Revolution and Civil War, where you saw Masons on both sides. And I remember one brother asking me, well, which Mason was right, in the conflict? And that's not a very fair question, because that would make me have to understand and determine their motives. There's no way I would ever know that. And even if I did know that, I can't tell you whether they're right or wrong, because I don't have their context. So the interesting thing about having such a diverse group of people coming together is that it's not friction-free or frictionless. It's actually has the friction in it, because even a seed has to fight the soil and gravity to grow. So there is that unique side of things when you look at having an dogmatic Masonic organization. Manly P. Hall, which is loved by many, he said, though the modern world may know a million secrets, the ancient world knew one, and that was greater than the million. For the million secrets breed death, disaster, sorrow, selfishness, lust, and avarice. But the one secret confers life, light, and truth. So when we look at Freemasonry, there is a underpinning to Freemasonry of the perennial wisdom, that there at one point was a complete truth that through time and circumstances has scattered, broken, kind of like a glass. Imagine if you had a glass pane and someone took a hammer to it. It was once whole, and then as you stop the time frame of the shattering, you can see how it slowly moves away and things get further and further apart. And I believe Manly P. Hall was speaking to the million secrets being all those shards of glass, that those are all the secrets, but they're only secrets of little bits of truth. Freemasonry is trying to bring them back together and to try to reestablish what that picture frame or that picture pane looked like and understand what it was trying to teach. And that is the perennial wisdom. And that is ultimately, that underpinning. This is why you'll see, again, that Freemasonry in its core is trying to unite, which is a slightly different perspective than maybe religion, which is trying to bring people into a particular lens of understanding and then deeming that as the only possible truth. You'll find a lot of us Freemasons here at Universal Co-Masonry really enjoy, on one level, just having conversations with different people about different things, because we're looking at all the shards that are coming out and we're trying to put it back together. And we also like to study comparative theology and comparative religion, because if we can see what is similar, and what is different, perhaps we can have a better understanding in what Masonry is trying to teach us. So I think this quote by Manly P. Hall is very beautiful in indirectly speaking to the perennial wisdom. So let's get to the differences in Masonic orders. There's a lot of ways that you can lay this out. Like I already did the dogmatic versus the adogmatic. This one I find to be the most clean, even though it's a little messy, because you have dogmatic and adogmatic. Again, dogmatic being that you have to believe through a particular religious perspective. Adogmatic, no, you just have to believe in certain principles that align, like permanence of the soul and a creative force, those type of things. But there's also who's allowed. Who are the members? And as you can see, I have here on the slide that you have all male, all female, or mixed, or as we hear in our name, co-masonry, being mixed masonry. There's that. And then there's also how they interpret the philosophy of Freemasonry. How is that physically enacted in their philosophies? So masculine really speaks for itself. I'm not going to read the Declaration of Principles. I think, you can read that for yourself, and I will leave that up there for you. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the different obediences. I'm just going to talk in general. So I'm not talking about necessarily specific Masonic obediences, but with the masculine orders tend to be, well, they are all male, but they tend to be more that you believe a certain way or have a certain color of skin, depending on where you are. Now, coming from the United States, where we're located here, our international headquarters is here in Colorado in the United States. The states are going to vary on their Grand Lodges, on who they accept and recognize and all that stuff. And you'll see some Grand Lodges to be more inclusive of who they're going to accept and others not. And that is up to each state. So what I mean by that is you have all male, and some of them will have Black, white, Asian, you'll have Jewish, you'll have Christian, you'll have something of that mix, and you have some that are predominantly one color and possibly one particular religion. So you have tendencies to see the Grand Lodges of, United Grand Lodge of England and all of the Grand Lodges that come from that be all masculine, and they're going to focus on charity of building hospitals, taking care of the homeless, dealing with orphanages, those beautiful acts of charity. And they are very, very good at it. For all the likes and dislikes people may have about one obedience or the other, they are very good at helping their communities. And that's what a lot of individuals, men, are looking for. We'll send them to the Grand Lodges in their respective states if they're looking to do networking and connections and business and charity. And also another all-male organization that tends to be predominantly Black and African-American is the Prince Hall Masons, although there are some Caucasian males that are allowed in, but it's predominantly African-American Black. And they also can focus on charity as much as the Grand Lodges across the country and across North America. You will see that not so much in North America, but in Europe, you'll see a large, extensive group of all female masonry. You'll see quite a few in Central and South America as well. And they can, depending on the obedience, they can focus on different things, but they can be charitable, but they can tend to be more civil reform in some ways. And there are a few that are spiritual as well. So it just kind of depends on what country you're in and what you're looking for if you're a female and you want all female. And then the last is the mixed, and that's the co-ed, and that's Universal Co-Masonry, Ladra Humane, Eastern Order. Those are the large three hitters here in the United States and across the world. The interesting thing about the co-ed is there's not a stipulation like you have to have X amount of men and X amount of women. It's really, at first, when I joined many years ago, it was predominantly women because men had a lot more, they wanted to do the more all-male organizations. But over the last 2 decades, I've seen quite the opposite flip, kind of an inversion, where we're seeing a lot of males come in to the mixed masonry. They tend to be outside of France, because France tends to be a little bit more civilly charged. They like to look at social reforms and things like that, more of a very political nature. So If you ever have the chance to go to the Grand Orient de France, you can, any night they have like this wonderful board that you walk into their beautiful building. It's multiple levels. I think it's 7 floors of all different Masonic temples. They're beautiful. And you can pick a meeting and you can just go to it. And sometimes you'll hear lectures on the latest social injustice or perceived injustice, as well as they have some more of the spiritual. It just kind of depends, but they tend to be more a civil reformation than anything. When you look at the other orders that are mixed, they tend to be more spiritual. Now, with Universal Co-Masonry, we are the largest mixed order in North America, but we're also the most unheard of, which is kind of unique. And that has its pros and cons for being unheard of, as well as, being the largest. And being the largest is no way in comparison to our elder brother, the Mailcraft Masons, who are ginormous in comparison. But when we look at Universal Co-Masonry, it isn't about numbers. It's not a numbers game. We're looking at quality. We're looking at people who has very sympathetic spiritual aims. Again, it doesn't have to be the same faith or religion or spiritual tradition, but our aims have to be sympathetic, like that humanity is worth saving, and that all of our work is dedicated to the great architect of the universe and under the guidance of. So there is a very big spiritual component that is kind of more in that, like that mixed Masonic obedience. So that's kind of how it lays down. So it lays out in who's allowed, like the membership, who's allowed to be a member. That's kind of a breakdown. And then what do they focus on in regards to the philosophy? You'll see that there's starting to be a very, very large divergence between Universal Co-Masonry and Mailcraft Masonry, as we call it here, in that we are very, very spiritual in our pursuit, and they tend to be more in the social sector. They tend to be more about society and charity and charitable functions. So there is a big divergence in that. I want to stop here. Yeah, I want to stop here and see if there's any comments on anything that I've brought up, any questions. I invite brothers from various obediences, as well as our own members, to comment and share their perspective. Just keep in mind that Universal Co-Masonry, we don't talk about degrees in any specificity. So please don't be, talking about secrets and stuff that we do in our rituals. So I'd like to open the floor for those who would like to comment or ask a question. And by all means, please don't be shy. Everyone's so shy. I can't think that I'm that great an explainer that none of you have anything you want to say. Brother Elio, just give us 1 second and you can go first. All right.
Oh, yes, Brother Katie. Having belonged to both of them, the Mailcraft Freemasonry and Universal Co-Masonry, I can just reiterate what you said. In general, Mailcraft Freemasonry being more social and more focused on charity, rather than in the symbolism and the spiritual aspects of Freemasonry, at least in North America. In Latin America, I come from Latin America. I also see that in Latin America, in certain European countries, in certain obediences, there is some concern, or not concern, but some focus in many lodges on the spiritual aspect of Freemasonry also, but it's not in general in Mailcraft Freemasonry. So I just want to, having seen both and participated in both, to confirm, because maybe some other people here have not been in Mailcraft Freemasonry, that it is so, just as you explained. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Elio. And I think it's important that you shared your perspective, because I've never been obviously in a Mailcraft lodge as a member. I've actually sat in Mailcraft meetings as a visitor, not in every place. Some places they wouldn't even open the door to me, but I think it's important that you share your perspective, because it's not just what I think it is. It's hopefully what it is, that there is a difference, and that the one thing I do want to say is I think there's an impetus for some people to say, like, well, we have to get rid of one obedience so the other one can survive. Like, although I don't necessarily agree with the exclusion of women, like, I don't want the demise of their obedience. I think they provide a wonderful service to humanity, and I would never want them to close their doors, even if I don't philosophically agree with their membership requirements. And I think that's something that has to be said, because it's kind of like, it's either or, like either they exist or we don't. And it definitely doesn't have to be that way. And in a lot of cases, it's not. And that there is some harmony between kind of like the different obediences as well as conflict. But I do think that is something that should be put out there, that, Universal Co-Masonry isn't actively trying to shut the doors of anyone because they don't allow women or they don't agree with this, and vice versa. But that there is true brotherhood no matter what path each Mason chooses to follow. Thank you for that, Brother Elio. I appreciate your perspective and your experience. Brother Maya.
Good evening, Brother Katie. I was curious, besides the landmarks, I guess you could say, of women versus no women and recognizing the great architect or not, have you seen any other differences in landmarks between other obediences?
Yes. The one that I see the most variation on is the belief in a higher power. Some obediences say it has to be a being of some spiritual sort. Here at Universal Co-Masonry, it's just something higher than yourself. It can be a being, it can be non-anthropomorphic, if that's what you believe in. And then there's some obediences that don't have they're atheistic. You can be an atheist and be in their obedience, and that landmark varies quite substantially. And with that, there is, the use of the Bible or books like that. I visited a lodge in another country where it was the Petit Prince. And it wasn't the Bible, it was a child's book. And so there's a variation on that as well. And I would invite any of the other brothers who know of landmarks that they've experienced that are quite different. But I would say those three, that, who can be a Mason, and what sacred books are used, if any, and what the belief is defined for a higher power. Those are the three that I can think of off the top of my head. Other comments or questions or thoughts to share? Okay, let us move forward. And again, I didn't get into all the nuances. There's others, because there's just a lot of ways to break it down. The one last thing I do want to say about variation in obediences is Universal Co-Masonry, the Droit Humain, and the Eastern Order are different in that they're international obediences, meaning that who governs us isn't at a state level, it's at an international level. So all of the lodges in Universal Co-Masonry are going to be governed by the Supreme Council, which is the highest governing body, who is tasked to make sure that we follow our Constitution, that we honor the landmarks, and that we follow the general rules and regulations as put forth. And so that is for the entire globe of all lodges that are from and of Universal Co-Masonry. What you'll see is other obediences, are usually based on state or country or province, depending on where they are. So here in the US, we have the Grand Lodge of California versus the Grand Lodge of Utah. We have 50 Grand Lodges. And their Grand Lodge is what oversees that state only. So if, for example, the Grand Lodge of Florida came out several years ago, I think correct me if I'm wrong, was it the denunciation of esoteric Freemasonry? Correct me, I think it was that. Like I said, I'm terrible with history sometimes, but they denounced something that I think it was that the practice of esoteric, anything esoteric or occult information was prohibited. That decree is only for Florida. That does not go anywhere else in the Grand Lodges. Whereas if the Supreme Council came out with an edict here at Universal Co-Masonry, all lodges, independent of country, state, or language, because we operate in multiple languages, that all lodges are going to have that same decree. So slightly different way of laying things out in the government of Freemasonry, which I have my preference. I love, we have huge conventions every August, which we won't be meeting in August because of it here at Seminar, but I love sitting at these conventions, and there's so many languages flying around a space, and there's so many people of all different cultures and backgrounds communicating, even though they don't speak the same language, but they speak Freemasonry, and they work very well coming together. And I really, really like that international feel, but that is my personal preference. Everyone is, is different. Okay, let us move forward. So this is specific to Universal Co-Masonry. So things that we often get asked a lot with our inquirers is, what is the requirements? And these are very abstract. And I think a lot of people want some very concrete ones, but I gave you some concrete ones just to make your life a little easier, but they tend to be mostly abstract. So personal requirements: you need to be a just person, upright and free, mature age, sound judgment, and strict morals. There's your abstract ones. So when you, or if you apply to Universal Co-Masonry, you submit an application and you undergo the interview process, you'll be contacted by 3 or more brothers of wherever you're applying, whatever state or country or province you're coming from, and they're going to just talk to you. They just want to know who you are. And the best advice I've been asked over the years, like, well, what do I say? Just say the truth, whatever it is that you think. And if it doesn't fit, it's better to find out up front than after you get through the whole process and realize that you're not happy where you're at. So just be honest, because if I were to ask, there's 3 of us here in this room, if I were to ask them what just meant, there's going to be multiple opinions. And so when we look at these are very abstract. And as a Freemason, we have to really kind of understand what these mean, not just to us, but on an objective level. So, just, are you, what does that mean? And upright and free. Upright, it goes with that strict moral sound judgment idea that you're living a life that is upright. You're not doing criminal activity or anything like that to gain a lifestyle. But when we look at being free, this is a freedom of a different type of freedom, because as we all know that women and Black people were, slaves. And so they weren't free. They weren't sovereigns of their own decisions, and they couldn't do things that they wanted to if they were told otherwise. That definition no longer applies. It has to do with the fact of freedom of certain vices. Are you free? So if you have an addiction, and I'm not just talking about drugs or alcohol, but an addiction that is so vast that it impairs your ability to make decisions that are good and right for you, you're not considered free. And so when we look at that, that's kind of the criteria, is we're looking for individuals who are at a level of sovereignty of their own self, so that they can make the decisions that are right for them. The one thing that's interesting is, because we are co-Masonic, that we allow men and women, we have families in our obedience, which you won't see in other places necessarily, like whole families, father and mother and sons and daughters. My own daughter had a Masonic baptism. Like, it's a different type of culture. And so when you look at this, you have to be able to come in as your own person, independent whether or not you have a family member or a spouse coming in with you. Because in Masonry, you don't come in as a married pair. You are separate and distinct from each other, and you are not reliant. So my husband, who's a Mason, I'm not reliant on him to advance in my own Masonic progress and my own spiritual evolution. I am a member, I'm a brother, I'm a Mason first, and then I'm his wife second, and he is my husband second. And that is very different. And it's important I say that, because sometimes we'll see people who will inquire who they have to ask their spouse for everything. And especially if their spouse isn't joining, that becomes very hard and creates an unnecessary conflict in the relationship. And Masonry, again, is trying to unite, not divide. So that freedom has a very different look in modern times versus when certain people were properties of other people's. So I wanted to clarify that. Mature age, there's 2 ages, technically 3 ages if I want it to be correct, and technically correct is the most correct, as Brother Patrick often tells me. So the stand-up age is 21 years of age, excuse me. If you are a child of a Mason, so your mom or dad or both were Masons, you can be initiated at 18. That's called a Lewis. And so there's those two ages. Another age that we look for in our requirements is the mental and spiritual age of an individual. You can have an 18-year-old going on 35, and you can have a 35 going on 12. So it just depends on who you're talking with. Oftentimes when people are talking about heavy topics like spirituality and philosophy, if they are not able to handle it, they start to make jokes about it and just debase it. And in Masonry, we take it very seriously. So we want to make sure that we're not debasing what we promote, which is, virtue and morality and spiritual evolution. And so when we look at that mature age, we're also looking for that other age, that's other ages within you, of whether or not are you able to handle what we're talking about. Because some of the stuff we talk about is deep and it's personal, and it can bring up a lot of emotions of all different kinds with it. And we don't want to ruin the trust, the family being the Masonic Brotherhood. We don't want to ruin the trust that is given to us when people will join. So we very much look for those hidden ages within a person as well. I think sound judgment and strict morals speak for itself and what they mean. So I won't belabor the point. So at any point, anyone can ask for an application and apply. But for those applications to be considered, it depends on each master of the lodge. But across the board, usually you have to attend either the seminar or the Masonic Philosophical Society. Now, again, some masters choose that you go to one over the other, and you just, you follow whatever the master says. These are two groups that are put on for your benefit, for your elucidation, for your experience and joy. And it is also a place for you to meet people that are like-minded, to see if you feel like it fits, to see if you like what you're hearing. When we look at the Masonic Philosophical Society, that is a discussion group. If you notice tonight, I'm talking a lot. That is by design. This is more of an informational overload. Fire hose feeds you in an hour and a half. The Masonic Philosophical Society is much more about sharing ideas. And sometimes we will refer an applicant to one over the other. One, they may not know anything about Freemasonry, so we tell them to come here so we can help you. The other one is they may not be able to articulate their ideas and their thoughts, or they don't like being challenged in their ideas and thoughts. So we would send them to MPS, as we call it. So it just kind of depends, but continual regular attendance to whatever one has been asked of you is important, because we're also looking for commitment. If you can't come in from wherever you're coming in from once a month, how are you going to be able to take on the responsibility of in-person meetings that are half a day, and all the studies that we have and all that? So there's a lot of reasons why we ask people to do that. And then it is an application process. Some people get confused because they sign up for more information on our website and they think that's the application. It's not. If you want an application, you have to email myself. If you're in contact with Brother Matias or Brother Rosario or Brother Catherine Murillo, you can contact them and they will give you the applications that go with it. So that's kind of the concrete pieces. And then once we get your application, you go through the interview process. The lodge hears your application. They hear the reports from those who interviewed you, and then they vote on you in lodge. And then if you're accepted, then you go to the ceremony of initiation, which is what's the word I want to use? It's the meeting that makes you a member. So that's kind of the process. So hopefully that kind of clears some things up for you. I want to stop here. We're at the end of this first half, right at our halfway mark. Are there any questions about anything I covered, anything in specific or in general that I can assist in just clarifying for you? Or are there comments to add? Maybe I left something out and the brother might want to chip in. Going once. Brother Cat.
Yes, Brother Katie, I don't know if there's anybody here who's brand new, but I just wanted to underscore just how incredibly useful, at least for me, from personal experience, it was to attend the Masonic Philosophical Society, because you really, like Brother Katie said, you really get a sense of the people, and you'll figure out whether you have found your people. And if you haven't, that's fine. Your people are out there, you'll find them, right? But you need to spend some time with us and us with you so that you're in the right place. And when you're in the right, it.
Thank you, Brother Kat. And it is true. And the other thing too, there's some people who love MPS or seminar and they don't want to become a Mason. That's fine too. Like, we're not going away anytime soon, so you can keep on coming. We'll never ask you if you want to join. The only time I've ever asked someone is because I think they were waiting for me to ask them. And I was just like, hey, just so you know, I'm not going to ask you. So if you want to do it, like, you need to ask me or whoever the right person is. So just if you're waiting to be asked, you'll be waiting a long time. So make sure that you're aware of that. And I agree with Brother Kat. Like, if you got to find, if you want to find your people, you got to spend some time with people to see if it works. Thank you, Brother Kat. Talo, you're next.
Good evening. You listen. I don't know if it's good evening, if it's good morning. I think it's good evening, yes?
It's good evening, yeah.
Okay. I ask you a question because I come from Portugal, and also here in Portugal we have different kinds of, how you say it, different kinds of, just like you said, dogmatic and not dogmatic Masonry, different kinds of orders. And in the past, I belonged to one, and now, because I don't have any part of any kind of lodge, I have so much invitations, not only in Portugal, but also out of Portugal, also from United States, and for other countries. But I don't know for sure if they really are people try to recruit me, or because I have some kind of problem here is about political parties. I don't want to make political parties, but because of my knowledge, many people want I make that kind of work, and that I don't want to make it for the moment. But one question: when people from the United States, if they call me or if they send me some emails, you think that is really some part of recruiting, or is fake? Because in my country I have some problems because I don't do what many people wanted. And it's possible to make fake invitations and that kinds of things. It's just a question I ask you to you.
It's a great question, Paulo. And we hear a lot of this with our international group that we meet with on Wednesdays here. I would be very cautious if someone's calling, especially from the US, because if it's not any of the Co-Masonic orders, because that's not any of our tactics of, like, we don't recruit. It's like a rule. We don't, like, you have to come to us. We can't come to you. And in the mailcraft, that's the same thing. They have the rule, to be one, ask one. So if they're coming to you and asking, I would be very, very cautious. And if you're ever curious, you can send myself, or if you have Brother Matis's email or Brother Rosario's, you can email us and we'll tell you what we know about them, whether or not, like, yeah, they're a bona fide organization, or we haven't heard of them, and let you decide on how you want to handle that. But I would be very cautious with recruitment, especially from the US, because that is not our style of things here. The other thing is a dead giveaway is when they start talking about Illuminati. Like, that is a scam. I wouldn't touch anything that said it was Illuminati on it. That tends to come from other countries that are trying to get your money. And unfortunately, we hear a lot of people who get taken by those. So just be very mindful. Anything that's to do with Illuminati or people calling you, I would just tread very carefully moving forward on that. Great question. All right, Kate.
Hi, Brother Katie. I have one question. It's more of it's not related to anything directly mentioned in the talk so far, but I've been looking a little bit into, like, advice from people on things you should look into when you're joining a Masonic order. And one thing that a lot of people bring up is that it's important for the lodge to be, like, official, like an officially sanctioned Masonic lodge. And as I understand it, since I'm a woman and I'm not related to any Masons and I don't plan on marrying one, I don't think I'm able to ever join any sort of official Masonic lodge. So I'm wondering, why is that distinction considered important to some people?
That is a huge question, Kate. I'm glad you asked it. It is a huge question. It is one that has come up quite a bit over time, because there is this idea that women can't be Masons based off of things that are asked that members, not in Universal Co-Masonry, but all male lodges that, and it's not everyone, but they're asked, to not sit in a ceremony where a woman is being made a Mason. And so therefore, a lot of people think that you make that commitment, therefore women can't be Masons, and that's not true. And then they look at whether or not a lodge is clandestine or irregular. Those are the two words they like to throw out. Let me just kind of go on I don't want to say a tirade, but it's something that has come up quite a bit. Clandestine means it's an organization that it does not have a proper lineage. Kate, that's what I think you're talking about. All lodges, I wouldn't say all lodges. There are some organizations, as Paolo pointed out, that that are recruiting that maybe are actually just covers for scams. Very true. Those are not Masonic obediences. I have come into one organization that was actually clandestine. Someone just woke up one day and wanted to start it, and there was nothing to it. And that was the only time I've ever seen one here in the US that came out, and I was like, that's unique. But when we look at the proper lineage, I'll take Universal Co-Masonry. We allow women, but we have a proper lineage, just like any of the organizations that follow it, in the sense that we come from the Le Droit Humain, who came from the Grand Orient de France, who originally came from the Premier Grand Lodge of England. So if you look back at that, and the Premier Grand Lodge of England is the precursor to the United Grand Lodge of England. So what's not proper about that? The other argument is, when you look at irregular, people don't understand what that means. Irregular means that you do not have a proper number of Masons to be initiating people, which is 7. There's no comment on whether they're male or female Masons. They have to be 7 Master Masons. I've never sat in a lodge anywhere, whether I was visiting an organization or my own, that had less than 7. You can't get around that number. So when someone says that you're irregular, that means you weren't initiated with the proper 7, which I've never met someone who was irregular under the correct definition. And then clandestine means that you don't have a charter that they believe in. Well, just because you don't believe in it doesn't mean they don't have a charter that's actually valid from a proper lineage. So, Kate, the short of it is, yes, you can be a Mason, and no, you don't have to marry a Mason, and no, you don't have to have, family members that were Masons to be a Mason. If that was the case, I would have never been allowed to be a Mason, because I have 0 Masonic affiliations that are immediate. I think I have a great aunt or uncle or somewhere. I have one, but that doesn't count. So a little bit of a passionate comment, because I see this a lot on Facebook, but it's from a lack of understanding from those who use those 2 words to divide instead of really understand where it's coming from. So yes, you can be a Mason. You can go to any mixed order that has, that follows the landmarks and comes from the lineages that they do, and you'll be fine. So hopefully that answers your question. Perfect. I saw a thumbs up on that. Brother Cat, and then we'll go forward.
Just as a quick note, probably, Kate, what you're talking about is the Order of the Eastern Star in the United States, which is a separate non-Masonic body for women who are related to masculine male Masons. So this is it's a separate organization that has their own kinds of meetings, but they're not considered Masons, and it's very emphatically stated that it is not Masonry. So for them, their requirement is, yes, you need to be married to a Mason, or related to a Mason, or some other Masonic contents, but that's not Universal Co-Masonry.
Thank you, Brother Cat. And I have an individual who's texting me on the messages and telling me that female Masons are Eastern Star. I am not an Eastern Star. I've never been in an Eastern Star meeting. I know vaguely what they do. I try to respect their space, not go into things they don't want me to. But female Masons are not Eastern Star, because as Brother Cat said, Eastern Star is not a Masonic institution. It is a Masonic ancillary organization for people who have affiliations to it, and they follow something completely different than Masonic obediences do. So great point, Brother Cat. I often forget that point, so I'm glad that you shared it. And then Brother Elia.
Yes, I just want to make a comment that there is a misunderstanding between regularity and recognition, because that means Co-Masonic order, this order is sponsoring this seminars, is regular because, as you mentioned, there is a lineage. So, however, it's not recognized by other for instance, Mayocraft Grand Lodges, or maybe even other Grand Lodges or other obediences. And this non-recognition is just a bureaucratic act. So for that Grand Lodge or for that obedience, they decided they would not recognize, for example, Universal Co-Masonry. However, that doesn't mean that it's not regular. It's there, and the same and vice versa. It's as regular as the Grand Lodge of, from what it came from, the Grand Lodge of England, the United Grand Lodge of England, in that sense. But there's no recognition, and these are issues between Masonic obediences, and as fortunately here, the Co-Masonic order, if one can prove one is a regular Freemason, no matter which obedience, they may even attend a meeting of a Co-Masonic order, right? But it's not the other way around. That's because we recognize regular Freemasons regardless of obedience. Or I'm speaking, that's my understanding that the Universal Co-Masonry recognizes the other regular Freemasons from other Masonic obediences, although the reverse is not accepted. So we have to make a difference between regularity and recognition. That's the point I want to make. Thank you.
Excellent point, Brother Elio. And it's true, because we allow women, you'll see that we're not recognized by some of the heavy hitters in regards to Masonic lineages. But if we look at, the point that Brother Elio made with bureaucracy and recognition, an example would be the United Grand Lodge of England and the Grand Orient de France. They were once in amity with each other until Grand Orient of France made a decision to recognize, it has to do with the state of Louisiana. It had to do with slavery. And the Grand Lodge of the United Grand Lodge of England got really grumpy about that and broke recognition with the Grand Orient de France, even though up until that point they recognized them. So it is a very political thing. And you'll find here at Universal Co-Masonry, we don't play that game. We're not here to tell you whether or not you're recognized or not recognized, of the right pedigree or the right landmark. We have a higher cause to fight for, which is the perfecting of humanity and working for the great architect of the universe. So oftentimes people will try to coax me into that argument and that debate, and I'm simply not interested, because there's no need for us to go there, because it's never going to be agreeing upon, because some people just believe women can't be Freemasons, and I don't agree with them, and so there's no place to go in that conversation. So great question, great points. Thank you for everyone who shared that with us. All right. I'd like to move forward to the second half, if I may. So we're going to talk about the 3 grand principles. So we looked at the requirements, we looked at the differences, but again, I want to go back to the big umbrella of Freemasonry and focus on the things that we all have in common, and that is the 3 grand principles of Freemasonry. They are brotherly love, relief, and truth. Very important principles to talk about. And again, I pulled this excerpt from our Declaration of Principles, which is on our website, and it says, to think high, to speak truth, to do well, to be tolerant to others, to search after truth, to practice liberty under law, fraternal equality, justice, and solidarity are the duties which the Supreme Council of Universal Co-Masonry prescribes for its members, seeking to build to the glory of the great architect of the universe, to the perfection of humanity, and to the service of the head of all true Freemasons. I love this particular excerpt of our principles, because it really speaks to the principles that we're trying to do. Again, you go back to those conversations that can be divisive, and it's like, no, I would choose rather to think high of you than that you're, a colossal, whatever, adjective you want to put in there. I'd rather think high of you. I'd rather think that you're trying to do your best. And that's not to say that I'm a Pollyanna or ignorant of what's out there, but I'd like to see that, even though I may not see the virtue in a person, that there is a virtue in every person. And Masonry constantly is reminding me that I need to think highly, which is really hard sometimes, especially for you road ragers when you drive. To think high, it can be really hard. And we all have those moments for ourselves where it's just difficult. But Masonry is a constant reminder that every situation, you can speak the truth, but you can still think high of an individual. To be tolerant to others is something that also has come to quite a head, especially in our very seemingly polarized society. I don't know if it necessarily is as polarized as we often think it is, but sometimes it feels that way. And to be tolerant. Tolerant doesn't mean to accept, it means to listen. And I may not agree with your perspective. You may hate my viewpoint on something, but at the end of the day, we will hear each other out and we will converse like civilized people about it. In Universal Co-Masonry, to this point, the one thing that we're very different on is that we do allow the discussion of religion and politics so far as it allows promotion of unity. Meaning, the example I give all the time is, it's not like who's the best president or who's the best prime minister. It's what are the qualities that make the best leader. That's what we're going to focus on. And you may think that this candidate has it, and I may think this candidate has it, or we may think no one has it, or both of them has it. But it's to talk about the idea behind instead of the people up front. And no, I've never seen a political or religious discussion get terminated because it got too hot. Though you'll see brothers will be very mindful of it. If they feel like it might go that way, they might just take it another direction because they don't want to be divisive. One of the first MPSs that we had was actually started in Connecticut like 30 years ago, but it reincarnated in the late 2000s in Salt Lake City was the first one to reincarnate. And I was worried because, Utah is a very religious area, and we were going to talk about abortion at this particular discussion. It was a part of it. It wasn't the main topic. And I think there was about 25 people there, and we were sitting in a massive circle, and I was like sweating bullets, because I'm one of the moderators, and you don't want the place to burn down because everyone's upset. It was one of the most peaceful, disagreeable discussions I've ever seen people sit in. There was 25 different opinions. People were very strong on it. But they didn't fight each other. They combated ideas, and they looked at their own ideas and looked at other ideas, and they were trying to see the other person. And really, that's what Masonry is trying to do. So toleration is something that has come under great stress in the last 5 years. And Masonry is constantly pushing that forward to really, you don't have to like what they're saying, but you do have to listen and let them speak, because I don't think anyone wakes up today and says, I'm going to believe in something I don't believe in, and I'm going to fight for something that I think is completely wrong. Everyone fights for what they believe in. So they're just as passionate and convinced as you are of your own position. So there's more that we can go through this, but fraternal equality, justice, solidarity, those are all beautiful virtues that we strive for under the guise of the brotherly love, relief, and truth. So when we look at the character of a Mason, let me just pull this up so we can see it. Oh, there we go. We're looking at a system that's really trying to get you to understand how to live a virtuous life, which is morality, or how to interpret what a virtuous life is, what is right and wrong, and then how to display that to others. So what is the ethical interaction that comes with it? And we spent a lot of time last month really parsing this out and looking at what that is. So Freemasonry is an ancient system designed to impart morality and ethics, which teaches mutual service to its members. Instead of lectures or sermon, Freemasonry instructs its members by the performance of ceremonial degrees. So we are a lot about ritual work, each with its own teachings, symbols, and message. Thus, the Freemason is taught by experience to serve the great architect, help his fellow man, and better himself. So we use ritual that to help us with that. Remember, I talked about that grand narrative. There's this great story that underpins all of the Masonic degrees from the 1st to the 33rd, and including all those English Rite degrees and others. That grand narrative is going to be put out through drama, through a story. And one thing that we do here at Universal Co-Masonry, which is done in other obediences, but not across the board, is that you have to go through your own ceremony. oftentimes we'll get people who can't get to a lodge or too far away, and they'll say, you know, can I just become a Mason online? No, you can't. If anything that the pandemic has taught us is that humans love human connection. And there's nothing greater than the experience of going through ritual physically, because it takes your mental body, your emotional body, your spiritual body, and pulls that all through the experience. And there's no way to get that on this type of medium. And so when you look at ritual, you become an actor, a player, a part of the grand story in order to learn what the grand story is trying to teach you. And in Universal Co-Masonry, no one's going to tell you what that is. I think there's definitely guidelines along the way. I mean, we'll tell you how to do ritual correctly, or if you have questions about certain things, we can give you our opinions. But I would never tell you that, like this, for example, this picture that you see on your screen, that it means this. I would say this is the background and the context of where this picture came from. But this is my impression of it. And this is what I have come to understand what it means. Now you need to go find out what it means for yourself. Because when we look at ritual is animated symbolism. It's what takes the two-dimensional and brings it into a place of volume, and then makes you experience it as a three-dimensional and a multi-dimensional being. And so it's very important that the character of a Mason, the only way that you become what you're supposed to be is that you practice it, and ritual allows you that place to practice symbolism and learn the truths. In essence, Freemasonry is a great quest for light, and her members are knights and protectors of that light. So like I say, you know, when we're having conversations and, you know, people are like, I think we should fight against, you know, gender segregated or skin color segregated Masonry. And it's like, you need to step back and you look at it and say, what is the light? What purpose do they serve? How do they do this? We can't, just because they don't agree with us, we don't agree with them, doesn't mean they need to be eradicated. We need to understand what that is. Conversely, there is evil in the world, and we have to find it and we have to fight against it. So, you know, I may not like what you're saying and I'll fight against what you're saying, but I will do it in the most brotherly, loving way possible, which is quite a dichotomous experience to go through. So we are on a quest to make sure not only that the light is preserved, but that it's passed on to those who come behind us in its pure form, not the form that, you know, Brother Katie thinks it is or Brother Benjamin thinks it is, but the form that it is unto itself. Its intrinsic form is the word I'm looking for. So brotherly love. Here is a quote by Robert Heinlein, who's one of my favorite authors. Love is that condition in which the happiness of another person is essential to your own. And so if we look at this, if we take a conversation such as politics or religion, or, you know, something controversial where you're very passionate about and the other person's really passionate, and you take the mindset that their happiness is important, is just as essential as your own, I think we'd listen more. It's not that you, again, agree with them. You might at the end if they give you certain, you know, valid, logical platform to stand on, but you want to listen to them and they want to be heard. And if they're doing the same thing to you, then you really truly have mutual affection. You really are meeting on that platform of brotherly love. A Freemason's foundation is founded on the principles of human solidarity, freedom of conscience, and the facts of brotherhood. It places no restrictions on the search after truth. And in order to secure that freedom, it demands the greatest tolerance from all members of the order. To a Freemason, the freedom of thought, speech, and action belongs to all mankind, regardless of any distinction. So I love this saying, you know, I may not like what you're saying, but I will die for you to have the freedom to say it. And that is a hard place to be. You know, I don't like what this particular ideology is saying, but I will fight my whole life against it because I don't agree with it. But I would still die for your right to say it, because that freedom of conscience, that pursuit for truth is what's going to facilitate a virtuous life. It facilitates that true human connection. How do you perfect humanity? I don't know, but I do think this is a good start, you know, listening and being brotherly. The worst thing you can say to someone is you're wrong, or I'm not listening, or, you know, any other type of variation of that. Like we all need to listen and really put other people's happiness, genuine happiness, not, you know, that base happiness, but genuine happiness. Everyone wants to be seen and heard, no matter who we are. And if we can give them that, And perhaps if they don't give it to us, they may learn to give it to the next person. Or if we're not the one that gives it to someone, maybe we can learn and give it to the next person. So brotherly love, we're meeting together for the common good of all, even if we disagree. We're never going to find two people that agree 100% on anything. So this is pivotal and paramount to the human spiritual evolution. Relief. Relief is a little bit tricky because oftentimes you can look at the counter side to it because it can become enabling. But relief, when we look at what relief is, and this is where I think our Mailcraft brothers really do it well. They do provide a ton of relief to the communities that they serve. And it's for that reason that I applaud them and tell them to carry on and do continue the great work, because they do it a lot better than I do. I don't have that type of money or resources, so let them do what they do best. With those orders, such as ourselves, who are very spiritual, the relief we come into is the relief of spiritual relief. How many of us have been searching and searching for a place where we can believe, not what we want to believe, but believe what we are, that we're led to by the universe to believe in, and have the conversations that are really hard, that are not easy, that we can really try and experiment with the application of everything. There is a relief in trust and solidarity. I cannot see my shadow all the time. So I need a brother to tell me that I have something in that shadow that needs to be looked at. And if I don't have a trust and a solidarity with them on that, then how can I actually bring myself to do any spiritual work or physical work or any improvement of any kind? And how can they do that to themselves if it doesn't exist? When we look at that type of relief, that's a very different type of relief than maybe the charitable that we were just talking about. Our brothers and sisters who do it in civil reform, there's relief in that because they see an injustice somewhere that needs to be rectified. And so they're working to relieve that pressure, that strain on that particular civilization and that society. So the relief can express in different ways. Now, as a Freemason, we have to constantly look at the boundaries of what relief is. And how does it look? Does it come with no attachments? And what does it look like if it does or doesn't? So what is relief and what are those boundaries in which we move in? And we have to be mindful of that, because I have seen it where, a bunch of ideas of what relief was really became toxic and very enabling, and it created a very mucky foundation for that particular lodge, and it didn't go well. I had to go in there and it had to be cleaned and purified and brought whole again, and when it was, but it was because of the understanding of what relief and what brotherly love meant, it got skewed. And so what you'll see, and what my point is in bringing that up, is that Freemasonry is active. It is solar. It is active, active, active. If you're looking for someone to unzip your head and open it up and shove a bunch of information in it, and you're just going to follow, I would not recommend Universal Co-Masonry, because it's very active. It's all about application, and we can all apply it in the various facets of our daily life. It's not necessarily going to look the same from instance to instance, but as a Freemason, we have to be very on top of how we define things. So an example is you coming into a situation and you have to ask yourself, is this the right act to do? Am I going to get the perceived outcome that is the right outcome? And some people will say, well, who are you to judge? Well, I'm the one giving the relief, so I have to judge somehow. So, how does that look? So taking that into account, Freemasonry, one of the bedrocks of the principles is relief. And that's why you're going to see a variation in how that is expressed in different Masonic obediences. Not everyone's going to see it the same way. And even within the same obedience, you're going to see it expressed different ways. So the third one is truth. Truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. Excuse my crude slang in there. But it's true. How many times has someone told you something and you got mad because it was true? And it gets you really mad, and you get so frustrated that it's the catalyst to make you do something about it. So it gets you so pissed off that you're like, well, I don't want to hear that again, so I'm going to change it. Or that's what I needed to hear. So thank you, Joe Class, for that really straightforward way of saying things. And then you have maybe a little bit more poetically said, Ernest Hemingway, the best way to find out if you can trust somebody is to trust them. And yes, that trust is difficult, and that trust is hard. And that's why you'll see, and I can only speak for Universal Co-Masonry, that we strive very hard to make sure that those people who want to be here, that are of the sympathetic aims of that we have as an institution, not me as an individual, that it parallels, that it's in line with. Because if you have too diverse, then you're not going to be able to trust in a way that you need to trust in order to find the truth within. So I'll go back to my example of not being able to always see my shadow. There are people who, they'll say something and I need to know if I can trust them in what they're saying, because I don't want to spend the time and effort if they're just being inauthentic and disingenuous in what they're trying to do. So in Masonry, when someone breaks the trust, it's a conversation to be had. And I've seen it. It's a hard conversation, but it's a good one because it reknits the fabric that was torn. So that, again, it can go back to having that brotherly love, relief, and truth, and that solidarity. And I love this particular image. This is a rendition of the Weeping Virgin, where you have death behind her. And, do you trust that the universe gives you what you're supposed to give? Are you supposed to meet death, or is he just there as a gentle reminder that immortality is not for the mortal soul or the mortal body, that for all of us death awaits? So what is it, the Latin, it's memento, what is it, memento mori? Is that what it is? Two head shakes over here. That death awaits, that we need to trust that our time here is short and that we need to use it wisely. And so I love this particular image for the 3 grand principles. I'd like to stop here and see what brothers have to say in comments and questions about the 3 grand principles. It is not long and laborious about what these principles are. And I think that's beautiful, because that means they're intelligible to each one of us. If you look at all the different relationships in your life, of the various kinds, do you have these 3 principles? And if you don't, what would those relationships look like if they did? And in Masonry, we have those 3 principles to help us do what we're supposed to do, which is, again, the peculiar system of morality, veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbol. And so if we have those 3 principles guiding us, then it's really hard to fall off the narrow path. Amy, you have your hand raised.
Unmuted. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I actually had some, like, you kind of stirred up some beautiful emotions within myself, to be honest, if I may, because I was resonating so strongly with this. And these principles, as you say, started to come into my life a few years ago. And there's been so many different things in my life where, well, I'm not starting a lodge. I did actually start something and it went sideways because, like, things happen. And so without these principles, to keep this short, without these principles, you don't have basic connection and ability to grow. And knowing when somebody's ready versus when they're, how do you say this? Not there yet, is a key. I think that's important for me, at least, so that if I need to wait a little bit longer and use tolerance to watch them develop to now where we can have like a full-on trustworthy moment, it's something that I just wanted to say. So thank you for your presentation. I'm done now.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Brother Kat.
Brother Katie, I thought that the quote on relief, no, I'm sorry, it was under brotherly love. The quote on brotherly love was very interesting because it sort of read at first blush like, as a Mason, it's the next page, yes. Foundation principle, no restrictions on the search after truth, right? And it's like, and to a Freemason, the freedom of thought is action, and action belongs to all mankind. And it's like, yes, but, right? So it's like if you're free to do whatever you want, right? And I'm free to do whatever I want, we can't both be free to do whatever we want because we have to make room for each other, right? So, and I wouldn't say that there's no restrictions on the search after truth. Like there's some restrictions, like you can't like actively manipulate people right? And knowing that you're manipulating people, thinking that it's some kind of truth, right? So there's a nuance to this where, at first blush, it sounds like it's all good, but in reality, there is a discipline and a restriction there. There's a freedom that you gain from from being restrained, from understanding the limitations that you have, the boundaries that you have in relation to your brothers. Right? I am not, the circle of my behavior is not infinite. There is a boundary, and I need to make sure that I know where that boundary is. And when I know where that boundary is, I have limitless freedom from my own actualization, because now there's a whole bunch I don't have to worry about, right? So I thought that quote was super interesting. I was like, but.
To your point, Brother Kat, the first point is the freedom, no restriction after the freedom, or no restriction from the search after truth. Doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. They are not equal to each other. You are free to seek the truth. But if you're manipulating people, to use your example, I don't think you're seeking the truth. I think you're seeking something else. And so that is something very different. There is an absolute liberty of mind that you can think and believe whatever you want. And sometimes I've seen it in my 2 decades of being a Mason, is sometimes that thinking and believing becomes incompatible with what the order stands for. And I've seen brothers leave, and that's why the door is free. Like, if you came on your own, you can leave on your own. No one's going to stop you. No one's going to threaten you. No one's going to do anything crazy. I mean, we might be sad because we liked you, and that sucks, but you have to be able to go do what you believe is right. And that's very different than doing whatever you want. When you look at the pursuit of truth, for an example, I've said it here before, and I'll say it again. We have a library here at headquarters. It's a very beautiful library. It is the largest Masonic private collection.
Outside of the possession of the Grand Lodges.
Right, outside the possession of the Grand Lodges. So it has a museum, and it has a bunch of first edition books. And in this beautiful library, it has an anti-Masonic section, because, again, you can go look whatever you want. No one's going to stop you to have that freedom of consciousness and the freedom and access to truth. Meaning, I'm not going to sit there and tell you that you have to believe this in a certain way and do something. Now, we'll tell you in ritual, you can't do it that way. It has to be done this way. There's not truth in that. Like, the ritual it's like, I'll take it back to science. Like, you can't just, do any chemical procedure and expect to get the same outcome. Like, you have to follow the procedure, but how you think and feel about the procedure, like, that's fine. So there is an absolute maximum freedom of consciousness, but there is a discipline that is required of the physical body, meaning that you have to sit a certain way, and you have to dress a certain way in lodge, and you have to, be a certain way. So I do think they're very different things. And if you're doing stuff that harms people, I would counter that. Perhaps maybe you're not doing what's truth in the sense of a negative harm, like manipulating someone or trying to take their money or do that. You're not trying to get truth. You're trying to get something else, which is much, much less than truth. Brother Catherine, Brother Catherine, I think it is now. And then Brother Daniel.
Hi, good evening. If you don't mind circling back, I missed your explanation of why the relief principle is important to Freemasonry.
So when we look at what relief is, first off, relief requires two things. It requires awareness, and requires either empathy or sympathy, depending on your personal experience. So when you look at humanity and you look at the interaction of other people, you have to be aware of what they need and what they don't need. So when you look at this, relief is a really big part of the whole process. And means that you are going to engage with the other people where they need to be engaged with. You're not going to treat your significant other the same way you treat a child or a neighbor, because the release are going to be different. I grew up in a very big family, and I remember being so mad at my parents because they let this sibling do something that I couldn't do, and they kept telling me we're not the same child. But that's because they were aware of the different relief. And so when we look at why it's the grand principle, it means that you're aware of your fellow beings, and that you are cognizant that they are in distress, and that distress is an impediment to in my belief, into the spiritual aspect of evolution. And if you can help them in that stress, then they can perhaps get over that obstacle and move forward. Otherwise, they may stay inundated in that stress and never get out of it. And then, their evolution is blocked. Sometimes walking away is the way to unblock the obstacle. And sometimes, a helping hand, and whether it's an advice, whether it's monetary, whatever the relief situation is calling for, that may be what is needed. So that is one of the reasons why, because how can you help perfect humanity if you don't even know what humanity is in need of? And in need of means there's a scarcity of something or an obstacle to something. And so you provide that in whatever form that may look like. Brother Danielle.
But Brother Katie, I was just thinking a little bit about the aspect of ritual that you were talking about, and the idea that it needs to be done with exactitude. But and while that's true, absolutely true, over time, ritual changes. It changes between orders. It's different in our obedience compared to other obediences, but it also changes within an order over time as different things are discovered and different work is made. I mean, I guess the question I have is it something that is what we're doing a reflection of objective truth, if there is room for evolution? And is there a room for evolution when trying to do what is true?
Well, Brother Daniel, when we look at nature, which is what I would always go back to for an answer, evolution exists in objective truth of nature. They coexist. The trick of it is not allowing evolution that is unnecessary. So I'll give an example. And when we look at, there was 3 types of moths. Don't ask me their genus or their species, please. There's 3 types of moths. And this was before the Industrial Revolution. There was a black, a white, and a brown type of moth. Then this was in England. And when you looked at the white moth, the moth was scarce because it's white. And so when it would lay against the bark of a tree, the birds and predators would see it and pick it off. And then you'd also see that with the gray moth, it was not as infrequently seen as the white. And then the black or brown moth, whatever one it was the most abundant because it had the best camouflage. And then you see the Industrial Revolution and how the soot changes things, how it almost made the white moths extinct because it really stood out. And you looked at a flip where the evolution played a part in a way that wasn't considered natural because of the Industrial Revolution. When you look at ritual, you have to be mindful that, yes, there may be additions or there may be some, whatever added, but why is it being added and where is it coming from? So with the evolution within the order that we belong to, why did that take place? Well, because it was restorative to what was once taken out because of World War II, which is an unnatural push on evolution, right? It's a stress. World War II, the Great Depression caused scarcity in resources. So not all the degrees could be done to their full glory. So they had to be modified to fit the situation. And then over the decades, it was kept that way because that's just what we all did. That's what they did. That's what we do. And then you have someone come in, such as the head of the order, and says, we know that this is really what it's supposed to be. So let's revert back to what it's supposed to be. Versus another obedience who takes the 25th degree and makes it about George Washington, which is very, American based. Now, you may agree with that, or you may not agree with that, but that's something that's more of a modern invention. And the reason why that was done is so that more American citizens would adapt and grok well with that particular degree. So there is a difference in how it evolves. So yes, I would absolutely say that evolution exists in the presence of objective truth. And if you look at certain legends within Freemasonry, it has evolved to match the temperament of the hearer. Because if it was about something that was long ago, let's say it was about Moses, not maybe many people would graft well with that. And so it was updated 1,000 years ago, or however long ago, 300 years ago, to make it more applicable to the growing I wouldn't say the growing mind, because I think the human mind in some ways is very much, I wouldn't say stagnant, but very level over time. I would say the customs and temperament of the story. So hopefully that answers your question, but yes, I do think they can coexist quite nicely. Amy, and you'll be our last one. We are out of time.
Thank you. I will make this super quick then. I think that even as we're always in constant motion and evolving, the plateau or the platform to which we evolve from is kind of similar. chaos, disorder, then order. So even as things change, to a certain extent, I noticed there's a similarity in the foundations. And one of the things that my spiritual mentor was always talking about is when somebody would come for me to help, it wouldn't be about what I thought they would need. It would be about speaking, the great architect speaking through me, like actually not being human, like being out of my ego, actually like what I would call, like how I describe it is tapping into the great architect and looking through the great architect's eyes. So I think it's important to lean yet not on our own understanding and actually ask ourselves, is it from the ego? Is it from my understanding? Is it also in relation with, if they believe that they have spirit guides, am I really being harmonious with what this individual needs to provide relief and aid and support? That's all. It's just a thing. And sorry, Homer, I'll make it quick. As a teacher, one of the things that I learned is the power of words, the power of language. Yes, you have to adjust things a little bit depending on who you're talking about, because different kinds of relief, right? But there's only so far that you should go without, pardon my language, but bastardizing or taking away, sorry if that's divisive, but taking away from the message. So I'm done now. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah, I think relief, that's what I was talking about. When you look at, there's boundaries to it, to Brother Kat's point, like there's boundaries. You don't want to manipulate it so far out that it becomes a gross form of what it was supposed to be, an imperfect understanding of a perfect idea. Great point. We are out of time. It is that time, so I'm going to stop. I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us, whether it be on Zoom or across multiple platforms. I'm going to stay on for about 10 minutes. If there's any questions you have, if there's applications that you want, or if you want to talk about an application or clarify a point, please stay on and we'll stay with you for the next 10 minutes. I do want to say we will not be meeting in August, as I said earlier, as we are hosting our international convention here at headquarters, but we will be back in September. And what topic it is, I don't know yet, but it will be good at whatever it is. If you want to hear more about this and love the topic, you can join us on Wednesday with our international group, which is at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. And the link is in the invite that you guys get. So thank you everyone for joining us. And if you'd like to stay on, by all means, we can chat for the next 10 minutes. Have a wonderful night. Thank you to our IT team here, Brother Patrick and Brother Benjamin, and all of you. Stay safe and have a wonderful rest of your summer. And I will see you in September.